Today's topic, Civil War. We are going to look at these documents here. So I would like you to use these images and kind of figure out the status. Here we have a timeline looking at the events. Notice how Seneca Falls, the first time where women's officially organized. And then we kind of break off into these other areas like the NAWSA, the AWSA, and NWSA, and those organizations. Declaration of Sentiments, where we see some of the arguments that are being made to address some of the concerns that women have. Notice how they're modeling the Declaration of Independence, where it's a he has, he has, he has. Declaration of Independence, it's a they have, which is a reference to the British. And of course, we have the divorce law and the requirements. It's kind of the focus here. I am going to open up this particular file. Let's see where this kind of goes. And I'll just simply go through these items. That way we know what to expect for any assessment. Notice the topic here is Civil War. That's kind of where we're at. We've already addressed the issue of Abigail Adams and how at the end of the American Revolution, she was trying to change the status of women. That is primarily where these two women come in, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Both of these women are part of the abolitionist movement trying to end slavery, and they want to have a conversation at the Anti-Slave Convention in 1840. However, any sort of reference in their speech to changing the situation of women is changed or denied, which leads to these women going back and meeting at Seneca Falls and making the decision to try to change the status of women on their own and create their own organization as opposed to being, associated with a different organization, mainly the, abolitionist movement trying to end slavery. This particular timeline is just simply looking at those items. Here we have the Slave Convention, Seneca Falls. Notice how we have the NWSA and the AWSA. Both of these groups would merge to create the NAWSA, National Women's Suffrage Association, American Women's Suffrage Association, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which combines both. Notice where the Civil War is, and the Civil War is significant because the Civil War is going to elevate the status of freed African slaves, and that is going to put them higher than women because they apparently can vote and women are not allowed. So if you believe that the African slave was, subhuman to justify acts of slavery against that particular group, then think about what you're saying about women if now you have elevated the African slave status and not the female status. That's where these three amendments come in, the 13th through 15th Amendment. These are the amendments that free the slaves and grant citizenship status as well as voting rights. So primarily the difference between these two organizations that I want to focus on in this class is that this group is primarily concerned with the right to vote, whereas these women want to have a complete restructuring of the female's role within society. And that is going to prompt a split within the women's movement, and that is where you're going to eventually see these women split, have tension, up until the point where they decide to align themselves with the NAWSA. So in this particular slide here, just looking at the changing nature of women from the 1800s, these seem to be the issues. Early 1900, it's about the female's place in society, and the sexual revolution, which is a topic of a later discussion that takes place in the 50s into the 70s. And then that leads to a conversation about the equal rights movement. So I guess right now in 2020, you can make a determination about where women stand currently. In the reading, I wanted you to look at this particular chart. And just looking at this one here, this is kind of the point that I was making. If we look here, if the white woman is third in the Southern system of stratification, by elevating the black slave, you have now put that person at the 3 spot, which then moves this woman down. And of course, that is according to the Southern system of stratification. And we've addressed this in class as well about the status before the slave codes. Remember, we looked at the slave code that determined the social status of the child by the mother. And so in this particular image, we see slave master, slave. And so if the slave master is free, the child's going to be free. However, when that black code or slave code is changed, Social status is determined by the mother, which would then change. I asked this question here, which is more threatening to Southern society, and the image you need to go with is this one, because this is saying something about the woman who is consciously making a decision to engage in a sexual act with the black male, whereas here it seems to be one that is more of force. Declaration of sentiments. I've already addressed some of this, so I'm not really going to say much on this one other than you probably want to just pay attention to some of the language, some of the issues that they're arguing for. We've kind of already addressed this in class. This one is really about how can a wife prove two of the following with regard to getting divorced. So for a female to get a divorce, and in this case it's Indiana, which according to the source here says that it's the easiest method for completing a divorce, which is probably the reason why when we go here, they're trying in the NWSA to end and change the practice of divorce in America. Why? Because it is definitely complicated. You would have to prove these particular items have occurred, and going before a panel of all males, this would determine whether or not the divorce is going to be granted. So think about when we talk about a jury of your peers, this really doesn't seem to be any of that. It's just men making a decision about whether or not a female is going to get divorced, which is probably going to be a no, and put that woman in a position where she has to remain in this particular marriage, because if she doesn't, she will then be viewed as somebody who has gone through a divorce, and then there goes the image of purity, going back to the four virtues in the cult of domesticity. Uh, so that's kind of where we're at. Looking at this particular slide, the issues, divorce, work, suffrage, that seems to be the issue. All I'm doing here is just drawing an arrow pointing to the women so we kind of know who they are. Some of the women were only concerned about suffrage, and some women just seem to be concerned about trying to change the status of women overall, which kind of goes back to this particular chart, which is the main difference between these organizations here. Here you see a certificate of National American Women's Suffrage Association as a lifetime member. One of the criticisms on the NAWSA is that they were primarily concerned about white women and women with wealth. How do we know? I mean, just looking here at the $50 member, if you're a woman of the lower class, whether or not you can afford $50 might just keep you out of this particular organization. And that's pretty much where we're at. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to the changing hierarchy, what is happening as the Civil War changes the situation in the South. And next class, we will begin the conversation coming from the book Rape and Sexual Power and the book by Hodes. And that will be next class.